So probably my favorite thing about owning this truck is the look on people's faces that I get when they're like, it has how many miles? Let's dive into that. What is this truck? How many miles does it have? And are Toyotas actually reliable? Can you buy a 200,000 mile Toyota and still have a low cost of ownership? So let's look at this truck. Let's look at the money I've put into it, and let's look where it is now. This is a 2001 Toyota Tundra Access Cab, 4-wheel drive. I'm the second owner. I've had it since 194,000 miles. Odometer here, we have just over 219,000 miles on it. Now I have added larger tires, so it's in the neighborhood. It could be as much as about 220,000 miles. Let's talk money. In 2021, this truck cost me $8,000 to get. So $8,000, summer 2021, 194,000 miles, no accidents, just a single owner, really clean pickup that had been really well taken care of. The truck was completely stock. Everything aftermarket you see on here is something I've done since then. So imagine bone stock truck, $8,000. Immediately, about $1,200 worth of maintenance. So that meant timing belt, water pump, radiator, lower ball joints. You could call it $1,500 depending on how you're having the work done, but that's what immediately was done. So we're looking at a purchase price realistically of $9,500 to get this truck to a point where I could trust it, having not owned it for the first 194,000 miles. That is not a terrible price for a decent pickup, provided that the truck is reliable from there on out. Before I had this grill, the Toyota emblem just straight up fell off on a camping trip like 2 months after I had it. It was just broken mounts. So right away when I had the truck, this interior latch was broken. This piece had broken off, so that had to get fixed right away. About 7 months into ownership, this tailgate latch snapped off. This snapped off, it wasn't opening. In order to fix that, you have to get down in here and you have to pop this off and put a new latch on it. What I actually figured out was happening is that these latches were dusty. That caused too much stress onto the latch handle and it broke. The handle wasn't defective. These just needed more lubrication. So I fixed that. Take a look at the interior here. There are a few things that right off the bat were an issue. Let me show you those. If we go through the gears here, there's no drive indicator light. It's burnt out. Doesn't work, never has. Everything else works. So things like the stereo, not a problem. It worked fine when I got it. I just wanted this to charge my phone instead. I have a suspicion that there are bulbs here, but they are burnt out. So this one's burnt out and this one's kind of burnt out. None of these are super bright late at night when I'm trying to find the HVAC controls. Something that has also been wrong since I bought the truck is an exhaust leak. I have clips of it. It's pretty prevalent. Like, it's noisy. You can hear it when you start the truck. I've never touched it. It's just kind of noisy and I know it's hurting my MPG a little bit. I have one legitimate failure where the truck has needed maintenance. Earlier this year, 2 of my coil packs went out. So this led to a misfire. It was misfiring, it wasn't working correctly. That was a legitimate time where the truck was kind of drivable, not really. It idled terribly. It didn't feel fun to drive. It felt like the truck was dying. So 2 years of ownership, the truck has once really needed legitimate repairs in order for it to be drivable again. And even then, they were cheap. Coil packs compared to a multitude of other things that can fail on other high mileage vehicles, not that big of a deal. Everything else has been normal stuff. Tires, batteries, brake pads, engine oil. Normal, everyday things that every car would need regardless. And these old vehicles are cheap to work on and easy to get parts for. There's nothing on this vehicle that's a regular maintenance item that's expensive. Oil is typical 5W30, brake pads are easy to find, the engine top ends are easy to work on, air filters, stuff like that. The spark plugs are super easy to get to. Replacing coil packs isn't difficult at all. These vehicles are designed not only to be overbuilt and low maintenance, but they're also so easy to maintain. The engine bay has a lot of room on this vehicle, very easy to work on. One thing that has been bothering the truck a little, but hasn't been a big issue. For most of the last year, I've had a check engine light for an O2 sensor code. I have done nothing to address it. It has not adversely affected the truck yet. The gas mileage has been identical throughout. It actually improved after the code came on. I do want to fix it to get rid of the check engine light, but it has had no actual issues so far from the O2 sensor code. In my opinion, that's a pretty low cost of ownership. Almost none of the issues on my truck have been extremely difficult to solve or extremely tough to diagnose or extremely expensive. The reason I have not addressed the exhaust leak is because I think it's an exhaust header, and that is on the spendier side of things. That will be probably more expensive to replace than it would be to get the coil packs done, and it definitely will be more expensive than an O2 sensor. So it's something I've lived with. I'm a little cheap. Like, yeah, I drive a 20-year-old truck for a reason. The truck runs and runs and runs. I've done several 2,000 or 3,000 mile trips on this truck, and it just goes. It runs really nice. It's very reliable. It's not something you can say about every vehicle. I have other vehicles that do strand me, that are less reliable, that have other nagging issues that are even worse. Like my previous vehicle, which burned oil, which just means your motor's kind of a ticking time bomb. I've had really good success with this truck, and I think Toyota reliability is not a myth. All of the interior pieces, the exterior, almost all of the truck has just lasted. There's a few small things I have to update and fix from time to time, but it's been a very sturdy vehicle. And this is not just me driving back and forth to work. This is long road trips. This is camping trips. I'm not exactly nice to the truck. Other than making sure I'm up to date on oil changes and doing a couple transmission drain and fills, I don't provide this truck with a lot of like excess care or maintenance. I'm not particularly nice to it, and I don't splurge on keeping it up to date on maintenance. I have not treated this truck incredibly well, and I have not pampered it, and it has continued to work day after day, mile after mile. As you can see, I've put on 25,000 miles in about 2 years of ownership, and it has done incredibly well. I do intend to fix it and update it and keep up on maintenance. I think for the overall longevity of the truck, I do need to address the O2 sensor. I do need to address the exhaust leak, but I've been able to drive it in the meantime with basically zero issues. It's possible that the misfire started happening earlier because I didn't address the O2 sensor. I do have to qualify the whole Toyota reliability thing. At least in my experience, while Toyotas are reliable, they're not without their issues. When I bought this truck, I had to look up, what commonly fails. One of them was the exhaust manifolds, which is where my exhaust leak is. If the radiator cracks on these, it does put coolant into the transmission, and their transmission blows up. So the truck was purchased, immediately new radiator. The lower ball joints, this is a problem on similar era 4Runners, Sequoias, Comas. The Tundra has them too. It's a faulty design. They fail at upwards of 150 or 200,000 miles, and it is a bad failure. So I knew, okay, if I'm gonna buy this truck, immediately it gets new lower ball joints. I knew that it has a timing belt. The truck was due at 20 years old, and at 200,000 miles, it was due both by age and by mileage, right? The service interval is about 100,000 miles and about 10 years per belt. When you buy an old vehicle, you should probably roll in the price of some preventative maintenance immediately into buying the vehicle, even if it runs when you buy it. When I bought the vehicle, nothing was wrong with it other than the exhaust leak. Like, it ran, it drove, nothing was wrong, but I still did preventative maintenance because I felt like that would save me money in the long run, getting it done right when I purchased it. And so far it has. None of those things have failed, and I haven't had problems with any of them. Had a lower ball joint failed, I would have been out a lot more than the $220 and personal labor that it took to do that. Same with the radiator failing, same with the timing belt failing. So those preventative items, you got to roll it into it. It doesn't mean the vehicle's unreliable, but it does mean that you have to pay attention to the service intervals. If you are purposely neglecting the vehicle on important items like that, maybe you'll be fine. These trucks are overbuilt, and I've seen some really old timing belts that should have snapped but haven't. I've seen some really neglected trucks, but in general, don't neglect the vehicle. The cost of ownership on this vehicle might be low, but is that worth it? Is the vehicle too old to be redeemable otherwise? If you're used to newer vehicles, yeah, this is a downgrade and it sucks. But as someone who grew up on these kind of vehicles, I'm kind of a fan. The Tundra interior is really old. It reminds me of my old 4Runner that I had before this. I just like this vehicle. It's very simple. It's easy to work on. It's easy to learn to work on vehicles using this. It's kind of noisy to drive. Between the exhaust leak and between the tires I've added, it's not very quiet on the highway, especially if it gets windy. This is not some kind of super comfortable, amazing daily driver, but it is a hardy vehicle. 6-foot bed, decent cab size, something that runs and drives. It's not as heavy duty as capable, and it's not as nicely appointed inside. They're 20 years behind where we're at now, and that is a noticeable difference. It's not the same. The point I would love to make in this video is that the vehicle is hardy and it works. All of my windows have always rolled up. The air conditioning has always worked. The vents are still in great shape. They aren't broken. These vehicles, when you take care of them, can last a long, long time.